So today I get to start my mill stand project. So the first thing I'm going to start with is I got a bunch of parts from Cut Send. So this is my coolant tank design. And before I get started, since I'm not the best welder, I'm going to try to weld up a tiny version with these weld coupons. So what it is, this is a mill I bought earlier in the year. I cleaned it all up, but I'm not really happy with the stand design. I realized that they're building it to a certain price point, but one thing is that all the chips just sit in this tray and the coolant will flow through this small opening, so you have to physically scoop them out, which is a little annoying. And if you look at the stand, you can see that the thing is dipping in the middle like a 1/4 inch. I could take this apart and weld some tube steel underneath it, but I don't like it. So if you look in here, you could put the coolant tank down here, but it doesn't seem to work too well with what I've seen online. So I decided to design a new stand that will be a whole new chip pan, where it'll be like the Tormach 8L lathe. The chips would fall in to a chip pan. That chip pan has holes in it. It'll fall down to a coolant tank, and then coolant tank can pump the coolant back up. So I designed the whole thing in sheet metal to get cut via Cut Send. I already got a new coolant pump, which is the same pump that they use on the larger mills, but I found this online from the same company for cheaper. So the first thing is going to be assembling the coolant tank, because everything kind of is centered around the coolant tank, and then that way if I have any adjustments to the model, I can adjust the model in those parts before I order the much bigger steel, which is the frame. So we're going to see how this goes. Okay, so here is the stand design in Fusion 360. I designed it all as like a tab and slot design, so it all just fits together, hopefully. So I don't have to try and jig it all together. So all of these internal frames are all tab and slot, and the main external frame is all tab and slot. This PC shelf screws in place, and there is a drip tray kind of funnel thing under here that will screw into place as well. So the way I designed it is I modeled it after the Tormach 8L. I really like how that stand looks and operates. So this is open underneath here, so the chips and the coolant can just flow into this chip tray. The chip tray has got holes in it, and I spaced the holes away from the edge so to try to keep coolant links at a minimum. And after once it gets through the chip tray, if we hide the chip tray, there is a drip pan here that I'm going to have a rubber tube that'll go down into the coolant tank. So it'll have this PC door, so the PC can fit in here, and maybe some of the manuals and some other things, and 4 drawers on bearing slides for more tooling and measuring tools, what have you, all the parts you would need for the mill. I see a lot of guys have another little toolbox here, so I wanted to incorporate all of that into the stand. But today I want to start the coolant tank part. So if we look at the coolant tank, so the coolant tank is made up of a couple pieces of sheet metal here. So this piece and this piece is one to make the tank. The one thing with Cut Send is they can't do tight U-bends, so I had to split this in half. There's going to be a long butt weld under here. I have 2 baffles to weld in here to try to keep the grime and stuff from getting into the pump. Then I got a pump tray. This pump tray has the coolant pump on it. This can slide back and forth. It's just lays right in there. I had them bend some rails, so I'm going to put some wheels on here so I can slide this back and forth, and I had them bend up a whole new front drawer mount so it looks like the drawers on the front, and then some rails. So I'll bend everything, or I'll try to weld everything that I can except for these rails onto the coolant tank. I'm going to wait until the whole frame is done, and then I'm going to space the coolant tank up so it fits in that opening really well, and then I'll weld these on. It was hard to get a measurement in the model off the bottom here, so I'll wait until it's done, and then I'll weld those on. And then when it's all done, once the whole thing is done, I'm going to get it all powder coated, and then after it's powder coated, then this is all done, and then I can mount the mill on here and put the enclosure. The mill I bought did come with the enclosure, and then I can get that mounted and work on the rest of the parts of the mill. But this is going to take a little bit, so today's the start of it. It's going to be a fun little project. Oh, they're almost there. So I'm going off this chart here using 024 wire, which is a little bit smaller. Basically 16 gauge. I'm going to do 17.5 volts at 402 wire speed. It's just a good starting point. So I got the machine set at about those values. So I set these pieces up, and I'll try to make like a little mini tank in practice. So I'm gonna have to weld the whole thing. So I'm gonna try to weld this and see if I can get the least amount of distortion possible before I actually go to the good material, because I really only get one good shot at this. So let's see what this comes out like. So here's my first mistake, is when I designed this cutout, I wasn't thinking about the clearance. That's the exact diameter of the pump housing. So that's not gonna fly, so I have to file around this so that this can go all the way down. Small details matter. So after a bunch of filing, this now goes on and off just right. So, personal note to self, I use this exact diameter. I should have added like another millimeter, 2 millimeters. So now this slides right down, goes all the way to the bottom here, and the bolt holes line up perfectly. So that's the pump plate. So that's the easy one. So I did a bunch of testing since I am not a welder. This is a little U-channel. I did MIG weld this. So I tacked it on the inside, and then I welded the outside and ground it flush. It sits pretty flat. That came out pretty good, but the amount of grinding I'd have to do to get this smooth is quite a lot. Now, I tried TIG welding. So this one didn't have the best penetration. This one I think was like at around 50 amps. The only bummer is these things do distort a good bit. So this one's 55 amps. The weld is kind of junky, but still not great penetration at all. These are 16 gauge steel, so 0.0625. So at 70 amps, I get a pretty decent weld and good penetration. And this is pretty flat. I wouldn't really have to do a lot of cleanup, which is nice. This one I think was like 75 amps. And I ground it, and that one had some good penetration. So These were some other practices with different amperages. Not the greatest, but once I got to here, this wasn't too bad. At around 70 amps, this works well with this machine, and I get good penetration through it. That's going to be a good strong weld. I need this to be solid because it's got to hold liquid so it can't leak. I don't want to have to grind all the way around. So these are all the parts. So here's what's going to be the front of it. It's going to be like a hook so you can grab it. So they can bend that, so that's nice. These pieces are trim pieces. They just go on there on either side. These are the rails that the pump motor plate will sit on. These are the baffles, and these are the end plates. So what I had to do, which I wanted to avoid, but Sen can't bend this U the way that it's formed, so I had to split it. So I'm gonna have to butt weld this whole thing and then weld in the end plates and then the two baffles and then the channel here. I'm thinking I'll probably TIG weld everything that has to be watertight and then MIG weld the stuff that isn't as critical, because these doesn't have to be super nice. I can just tack it. I don't need to weld the whole thing, but these I have to weld the entire thing all the way around so that it doesn't leak. So I'm gonna take my sweet time and hopefully not turn this sheet metal into a complete pretzel, and hopefully it comes out okay. All right, so I have the side rails on. I just tacked those in 5 spots on the top and bottom. It doesn't need to hold much weight, so I don't need to do a giant weld on here. So what I'm gonna do next is I have this cleaned up. I'm gonna tack in a couple spots to join the two main bodies of the coolant tank. Then I'm gonna put the end plates on, tack those on, and then I'll put the baffles in. I'll tack those in to try to hold everything together in the right shape. Then I'll weld the whole thing out. So this is how far I got today. So I got the whole tank tacked together. I got the two baffles in here. This just slides in there, but I got that to fit. I got the rails on there. So I TIG-tacked it all the way around. I used MIG in here because it's not that critical. It just has to try to stop the flow of crud on the bottom. I'm not going to get crazy about sealing the thing up. It's just trying to prevent some of the crud. So tomorrow I think I'll tack this all together. So I got to put these sides on, so I'll tack those on. And then I think I'll finish weld, so I have to weld all the way around this whole seam. And then I have to weld this entire seam, and I'm hoping it doesn't distort too badly. I want to do it in like small sections, maybe like 1 inch, 1 inch, 1 inch, and then just go around. So monitor it, and then if it's getting out of control, maybe just stop and let it cool. So not too bad for today.